SUA, the people who judge you fastest usually know the least about you. Nobody standing inside the Grand Crescent Hotel that afternoon realized how true those words were about to become. The lobby shimmered with quiet luxury. Crystal chandeliers reflected warm light across polished marble floors. Guests rolled designer luggage toward private elevators, while soft piano music drifted through hidden speakers. Near the center of the lobby stood Richard Collins, the hotel's operations manager. At 52, Richard carried himself with the confidence of a man who believed he could identify important people the moment they walked through the door. He prided himself on reading appearances, expensive watches, tailored suits, luxury handbags. In his mind, status had a uniform, and anyone who did not fit that image immediately attracted his suspicion. That was why his attention settled on Monica Reed the moment she entered. Monica carried a small travel bag over one shoulder. Her clothes were neat but simple after a long flight. Comfortable walking shoes replaced the expensive footwear most guests displayed. She paused near the entrance, quietly studying the lobby as if searching for something. Nothing about her behavior seemed unusual. Nothing about her actions disturbed anyone. Yet Richard had already decided she did not belong. Several guests continued checking in while a group of business travelers gathered near the conference area. Nobody paid much attention until Richard began walking toward Monica. His polished dress, shoes echoed softly across the marble floor. Monica noticed him approaching and offered a polite smile. Richard did not return it. Instead, he stopped several feet away and looked her up and down before speaking. "Can I help you?" His tone suggested the opposite. Monica remained calm. "I am looking for someone." Richard folded his arms. "Are you staying here?" "I have an appointment." Richard glanced at her travel bag, then at her shoes, then back at her face. Whatever answer he expected, it was not the one he received. "People like you do not belong here," he said loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. Conversation slowed. Several heads turned. A woman waiting near the concierge desk looked uncomfortable. A businessman lowered his phone. The piano music continued playing, but the atmosphere had changed. Monica stood perfectly still. There was no anger on her face. No embarrassment, only quiet patience. Richard seemed irritated by her composure. "This hotel is private property," he continued. "If you are not a guest, you need to leave." Monica looked at him for a moment before asking a simple question. "Did you check the visitor list?" Richard laughed softly, not because the question was funny, but because Monica did not move. The marble floor beneath her reflected the warm glow of the chandeliers overhead, while guests quietly watched the uncomfortable exchange unfold. Richard Collins seemed increasingly annoyed by her refusal to react the way he expected. Most people would have argued. Some would have left immediately. Monica didn't either. She simply stood beside her travel bag and observed the manager with the calm patience of someone who understood something he did not. The silence stretched long enough for nearby conversations to fade completely. A concierge glanced nervously toward the reception desk. Two business travelers exchanged uncertain looks. Even the front desk clerk appeared uncomfortable. Richard noticed the attention and interpreted it as support. In reality, it was concern. "I am asking you one last time," he said. "Please leave the property." Monica looked toward the reception area where several computer screens displayed guest information, reservations, and scheduled visitors. "You still have not checked the list?" she said quietly. Richard shook his head. "I do not need to." The certainty in his voice revealed exactly why he was making a mistake. He had already reached a conclusion before examining a single fact. Monica lowered her eyes briefly and smiled to herself. The reaction confused him. There was no fear, no embarrassment, no frustration, only confidence. That confidence had been built over decades. Earlier that morning, Monica had landed after a cross-country flight. She had traveled alone with a single carry-on bag. Most people who knew her professional background would have expected private transportation, assistance, or an entourage. Monica preferred simplicity. She liked seeing places as they truly operated when nobody knew she was coming. It was a habit she had developed years ago. It allowed her to observe people honestly. It allowed her to see how organizations treated strangers. And today, that habit was revealing more than she expected. Richard stepped slightly closer. "This is not a public waiting area." Monica nodded. "I understand. Then why are you still here?" She looked directly at him. "Because I am expected." Those 3 words should have ended the conversation. Instead, they seemed to irritate him further. A woman standing near the elevators quietly whispered something to her husband. Neither looked convinced by Richard's behavior. The atmosphere in the lobby had changed. People were no longer questioning Monica's presence. They were beginning to question his judgment. Richard did not notice. He was too focused on proving himself right. Monica glanced toward a framed directory mounted near the entrance. Several executive meeting rooms were listed there. One name in particular appeared near the top. She studied it for only a moment before looking away. Richard followed her gaze but failed to understand its significance. Then a young receptionist approached cautiously from behind the front desk. "Sir," she said softly, "should we verify the visitor schedule?" Richard immediately dismissed the suggestion. "That will not be necessary." Monica noticed the receptionist's expression. The young woman looked surprised by the answer. After all, checking the schedule would have taken less than 30 seconds. Yet Richard refused. Monica adjusted the strap on her travel bag and looked toward the revolving doors leading outside. Somewhere beyond those doors, events were already in motion. And the longer Richard ignored the simplest step in the process, the closer he moved toward a mistake that everyone in the building would soon remember. Richard Collins had built an entire career on first impressions, and that was precisely why he failed to notice the warning signs surrounding Monica Reed. Standing in the center of the hotel lobby, he remained convinced that he understood the situation better than anyone else. The receptionist who had suggested checking the visitor schedule quietly returned to her station. Several guests resumed their conversations, but not completely. Their attention lingered. Monica could feel it. She could also feel the weight of Richard's certainty. It was familiar. Over the years, she had encountered people who believed confidence was the same thing as accuracy. They often spoke quickly, judged quickly, and regretted it later. Monica looked around the lobby once more. The Grand Crescent was known throughout the region as one of the flagship properties owned by a growing hospitality group. Every detail reflected that reputation. Fresh flowers decorated polished tables. Large windows filled the space with natural afternoon light. Employees moved carefully through their responsibilities. On the surface, everything appeared perfect. Yet Monica had not traveled across the country to admire chandeliers and marble floors. She had come because someone wanted an honest assessment of how the organization functioned when leadership was not watching. Ironically, leadership was watching. They just did not realize it. Richard adjusted his jacket and glanced toward the revolving doors. "I have managed this property for 11 years, he said. "I know every important guest who walks through those doors." Monica listened without interrupting. "That is impressive," she replied. The answer sounded sincere, which somehow irritated him even more. He expected resistance. He expected excuses. Instead, she treated him with a calm respect he had not earned. Near the concierge desk, a silver-framed photograph caught Monica's attention. It showed several executives standing together during a ribbon-cutting ceremony years earlier. She recognized every face. Some she had spoken with only days ago. One of them had personally invited her to visit. Richard noticed her looking at the photograph. "Those are the people who built this company," he said proudly. Monica nodded. Some of them did. The response was subtle, but it carried meaning he completely missed. A hotel employee passing through the lobby slowed briefly after hearing the exchange. Something about Monica's confidence seemed unusual. Most people being pressured to leave would appear uncomfortable. Monica appeared patient, as though she were waiting for a clock to reach a specific time. Then her phone vibrated softly. She looked at the screen but did not answer. Instead, she typed a brief message and slipped the phone back into her pocket. Richard noticed. "Calling someone to complain?" Monica smiled. "Not exactly." That answer only deepened the mystery. Across the lobby, the receptionist glanced at her computer screen and suddenly froze. A name had just appeared within the afternoon visitor schedule. Her eyes widened. She checked it twice, then a third time. Slowly, she looked up toward Monica. The young woman's expression changed immediately. Confusion became recognition. Recognition became concern. She opened her mouth as if to say something. But before she could speak, the hotel's front entrance began to rotate, and someone unexpected had just arrived. The revolving doors turned slowly, allowing a rush of cool autumn air to enter the lobby. Several guests glanced toward the entrance, expecting another traveler or business executive. Instead, a sharply dressed regional director stepped inside, carrying a leather portfolio. The moment he crossed the threshold, The young receptionist who had been studying the visitor's schedule hurried toward him. She spoke quietly, careful not to draw attention. The director listened for only a few seconds before his expression changed. He immediately looked across the lobby toward Monica. Richard noticed the reaction but misunderstood it. He assumed the director had arrived to support management. The possibility that he had walked into a problem never occurred to him. Monica remained exactly where she was. Calm, patient, unmoved by the growing tension around her. The director approached and offered a professional smile. "Good afternoon," he said. "Have you been waiting long?" Before Monica could answer, Richard stepped forward. "There has been a misunderstanding," he said confidently. "She is not a guest." The director looked at him, then at Monica, then back at Richard. "Did you verify that?" he asked. The question landed harder than Richard expected. "I have been managing hotels for over a decade," Richard replied. "I know when someone belongs here." The director did not respond immediately. Instead, he glanced toward the reception desk. The receptionist was already holding a printed visitor schedule. Her hands trembled slightly as she approached. "Sir," she said carefully, "the name is here." Richard frowned. "What name?" The receptionist looked at the paper, then at Monica. "Her name." A quiet murmur moved through the lobby. Richard's confidence began showing its first small crack. He took the paper and scanned it quickly. His eyes narrowed. Monica Reed. The name appeared exactly where she said it would. Scheduled arrival. Executive meeting. Private conference room. Richard stared at the page for several seconds. "There must be some mistake," he said. The director folded his arms. "That would be surprising." Monica said nothing. She simply watched events unfold. Nearby guests were no longer pretending not to listen. The situation had become impossible to ignore. Richard looked at Monica again, searching for an explanation that would restore his certainty. "Who exactly are you meeting?" he asked. Monica glanced toward the large windows overlooking the hotel entrance. Reflections of passing vehicles shimmered across the glass. "Someone who invited me," she replied. The answer sounded simple, yet it carried a confidence that made the director straighten slightly. Then Monica's phone vibrated. She checked the screen and smiled. "Right on time," she said. Outside, several dark vehicles turned into the circular driveway. Valets immediately became attentive. Employees near the entrance exchanged curious looks. The director followed Monica's gaze toward the arriving motorcade. His expression shifted instantly. Recognition, surprise, concern. Richard noticed it and felt uncertainty settle into his stomach for the first time all afternoon. Because whoever had just arrived was clearly important. Very important. And judging by the way Monica calmly picked up her travel bag, she had been expecting them all along. The dark vehicles came to a smooth stop beneath the covered entrance, and the energy inside the hotel shifted immediately. Valets straightened their uniforms. Front desk employees exchanged nervous glances. Even guests who had been pretending not to watch now turned openly toward the glass doors. Monica stood quietly with one hand resting on the handle of her travel bag. She looked neither surprised nor impressed by the arrival. It was simply the next step in a day she already understood. Richard Collins, however, felt uncertainty growing stronger with every passing second. The first vehicle door opened, followed by another. Several senior executives stepped out, dressed in tailored business attire and moving with the confidence of people accustomed to making important decisions. The regional director beside Richard immediately adjusted his posture. That reaction alone was enough to make Richard uneasy. Then the final vehicle door opened. A distinguished man in his 60s stepped onto the sidewalk. The moment he appeared, several employees visibly stiffened. Everyone in the hospitality group knew who he was. Thomas Bennett, founder, chairman, the man whose vision had built the company from a handful of properties into a nationally respected brand. Richard had only met him twice in 11 years. Both encounters had lasted less than a minute. Yet here he was, arriving unexpectedly at the hotel. Richard immediately started toward the entrance, preparing to greet him. Before he could take more than 2 steps, Thomas walked directly past him, past the regional director, past the reception desk, past every manager standing in the lobby. He continued moving until he stopped directly in front of Monica. For a brief moment, the entire lobby seemed frozen. Then Thomas smiled. Not a formal executive smile, a genuine one. "Monica," he said warmly, "I was hoping you arrived safely." Monica returned the smile. "The flight was fine." Thomas shook his head with amusement. You could have called me the moment you landed. I preferred to observe first, Monica replied. Thomas laughed softly. The regional director lowered his eyes. He suddenly understood far more than he wanted to. Richard remained motionless. His mind searched desperately for an explanation that made sense. Yet none appeared. Around the lobby, employees exchanged stunned looks. Guests whispered quietly among themselves. Monica and Thomas spoke with the familiarity of people who had known each other for years. There was respect between them. Trust. History. None of it matched the story Richard had constructed in his head. Thomas finally glanced around the lobby. His eyes moved across the reception desk, the gathered staff, and eventually settled on Richard. The smile slowly faded from his face. Has everything gone smoothly? He asked. The question sounded simple, yet everyone in the room understood its weight. Monica looked toward Richard, then toward the visitor schedule still resting on the reception counter. She remained silent. She did not need to explain anything. The atmosphere itself told the story. Thomas followed her gaze. What he noticed next caused his expression to change completely. And for the first time that afternoon, Richard Collins realized that the person he had spent hours trying to remove from the hotel might be far more important than anyone inside the building had imagined. For several seconds, nobody in the lobby spoke. The soft piano music continued drifting through the air, but it felt distant now. Thomas Bennett's attention remained fixed on Monica, while everyone else seemed to be waiting for an explanation. Richard Collins stood motionless near the reception desk. The certainty that had guided him throughout the afternoon was disappearing one uncomfortable realization at a time. Thomas looked toward the visitor schedule resting on the counter. Then he looked at the regional director. Has Monica been escorted to the executive conference suite yet? He asked. The question immediately sent a ripple through the room. The regional director hesitated. Not exactly. Thomas frowned slightly. Not exactly? Before anyone could answer, Monica gently placed her travel bag beside a chair and folded her hands. Her calm presence somehow made the silence even heavier. Thomas studied the faces around him. Years of leadership had taught him how to read a room quickly. Something had happened. He could see it in the nervous expressions of the employees and in the way several guests continued watching from a distance. Finally, the receptionist stepped forward. She did not exaggerate. She did not assign blame. She simply explained what had occurred since Monica entered the hotel. The more she spoke, the quieter the lobby became. Richard stared at the marble floor. The regional director closed his eyes briefly. Thomas listened without interruption. When the explanation ended, he took a slow breath. Then he turned toward Monica. I am sorry you experienced that. Monica offered a small smile. I learned a great deal. Thomas understood exactly what she meant. The visit had never been a vacation. It had never been a social call. There was a reason her arrival had been kept confidential. Only a handful of senior executives knew she was coming. The purpose was simple. They wanted an honest evaluation of how their properties operated when employees believed nobody important was watching. Thomas finally faced the gathered managers. Perhaps it is time everyone understands why Monica is here. Every employee in sight straightened immediately. Even the guests nearby seemed to sense something significant was about to be revealed. Thomas stepped beside Monica. Several months ago, our board approved a major ownership restructuring. Confused expressions spread across the room. Richard looked up slowly. Thomas continued. Part of that restructuring involved bringing in a new strategic partner and board member. The regional director's eyes widened. He already suspected where the conversation was going. Thomas nodded toward Monica. Monica Reed is that partner. The words landed with stunning force. A few employees exchanged shocked glances. Others simply stared. Richard felt as though the floor had disappeared beneath him. Yet Thomas was not finished. Beginning this quarter, Monica will help oversee operational evaluations across multiple properties. Monica remained calm while the revelation spread through the lobby. She did not look proud. She did not look victorious. She looked thoughtful, almost saddened. Thomas glanced around the room one final time. Today was supposed to be an observation visit. He paused. Instead, it became something none of us expected. And as the full meaning of his words settled across the hotel, Richard finally understood that the woman he had spent the entire afternoon trying to remove from the building had actually arrived with the authority to evaluate everything he had done. The revelation settled over the lobby like a sudden change in weather. Nobody rushed to speak. Nobody seemed certain what words could possibly follow. The chandeliers continued casting warm light across the marble floor, but the atmosphere felt entirely different now. Employees who had spent the afternoon observing from a distance suddenly understood why Monica's calm confidence had never faded. She had known exactly who she was from the moment she entered the building. The only people who did not know were the ones making assumptions about her. Richard Collins stood silently near the reception desk. Every confident statement he had made earlier replayed in his mind. The visitor list he refused to check. The conclusions he reached without evidence. The certainty that had once felt like experience now looked painfully different. Thomas Bennett glanced around the room before addressing the staff. The purpose of an evaluation is not to find perfect buildings, he said. It is to understand how people are treated when nobody believes they are being observed. His words landed heavily. Several managers lowered their eyes. Monica listened quietly. She had participated in enough leadership reviews to know that systems reveal themselves through ordinary moments. Policies matter. Procedures matter. But character matters most when something unexpected happens. The regional director stepped forward. Monica has spent years helping organizations improve customer experience and operational culture, he explained. Her recommendations have transformed properties across multiple industries. Guests who remained in the lobby exchanged surprised glances. The story had become far larger than a misunderstanding at a hotel entrance. Thomas nodded. That is why she was invited here. Then he looked directly at Monica. Your observations will help shape the future of this company. Richard felt those words more deeply than anyone else in the room. The woman he had dismissed was not simply important. She had been trusted with helping guide the organization forward. For the first time all afternoon, he truly understood the scale of his mistake. Yet Monica showed no interest in humiliating him. She did not point out his errors. She did not repeat the things he had said. Instead, she picked up her travel bag and looked around the lobby one more time. Her eyes moved from the reception desk to the concierge station, then toward the employees who had remained professional despite the tension. She noticed the young receptionist who had tried to verify the visitor list. She noticed the concierge who had looked uncomfortable during the confrontation. Small details often revealed important truths. Thomas watched her carefully. What are your first impressions? He asked. The question immediately captured everyone's attention. Monica considered her answer for a moment. I see talented people, she said. I see employees who care about guests. Relief briefly crossed several faces. Then she continued. I also see what happens when assumptions replace process. The lobby became quiet again. No one could argue with that observation. It was simple, accurate, unavoidable. Thomas slowly nodded. The regional director wrote something in a notebook. Richard stared at the floor. Monica had summarized the entire afternoon in a single sentence. Then Thomas gestured toward the executive conference area. We should begin the meeting. Monica smiled politely and started walking beside him. As they moved toward the elevators, dozens of unanswered questions remained hanging in the air. But one truth had become impossible to ignore. The evaluation had only just begun, and what Monica planned to reveal next would reach far beyond a single manager's mistake. The executive meeting lasted several hours, but the conversation inside the conference suite was not what most people expected. Monica did not spend her time discussing revenue projections or expansion plans. Instead, she focused on something far more important. She spoke about culture. She spoke about trust. She spoke about the invisible moments that determine whether an organization truly lives by its values. As afternoon sunlight slowly shifted across the floor-to-ceiling windows, senior executives listened carefully. Monica described her experience from the moment she entered the hotel. Not dramatically, not emotionally, simply fact by fact. She explained how quickly assumptions had replaced procedures. She explained how easily a visitor list could have resolved the situation. Most importantly, she explained how several employees had tried to do the right thing but were ignored. Thomas Bennett took notes throughout the discussion. So did the regional director. By the end of the meeting, nobody doubted the seriousness of what had happened. Yet Monica's recommendations surprised everyone. She did not request disciplinary action. She did not demand anyone lose a position. Instead, she proposed improvements. Better training, better accountability, stronger operational standards, systems designed to prevent assumptions from overriding process. When the meeting concluded, Thomas walked beside her toward the elevators. You could have recommended much harsher consequences, he said quietly. Monica smiled. Consequences can correct behavior, she replied. Understanding changes it. Thomas nodded thoughtfully. The answer perfectly reflected why he respected her judgment. Meanwhile, downstairs, Richard Collins sat alone in a small office reviewing the events of the day. The hotel lobby outside continued operating normally. Guests checked in. Employees assisted visitors. Luggage carts moved through the hallways. Yet for Richard, everything felt different. The confidence he once carried now seemed misplaced. For years he had believed experience gave him the ability to instantly recognize who belonged and who did not. Today had exposed the flaw in that belief. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. He looked up to find Monica standing in the doorway. For a moment neither spoke. Then Richard stood. "I owe you an apology," he said. There was no defensiveness left in his voice. No attempt to justify his actions. Only honesty. Monica listened quietly. "I never checked the list," he continued. "I assumed I knew the answer before I looked for the facts." Monica nodded. "Yes." Richard lowered his eyes briefly. "I embarrassed myself more than anyone else." The statement carried a painful truth. Monica considered him for a moment. She saw someone confronting a mistake he could no longer ignore. "What happens next is up to you," she said gently. Richard looked confused. Monica continued. "You can treat today as a humiliation, or you can treat it as a lesson." The words settled heavily between them. Then she offered a small smile and stepped back into the hallway. Richard remained standing in the doorway long after she disappeared from view. For the first time that day, he was not thinking about titles, authority, or status. He was thinking about character. And downstairs, as evening light began filling the lobby with shades of gold, the hotel quietly prepared for a future that would be shaped by everything Monica had chosen not to do. 6 weeks later, the Grand Crescent Hotel looked much the same from the outside. Guests still arrived beneath the covered entrance. Valets still greeted visitors with professional smiles. The chandeliers still reflected warm light across the marble lobby. Yet beneath the familiar appearance, something important had changed. New training programs had been introduced throughout the hospitality group. Visitor verification procedures had been updated. Managers were being evaluated not only on performance metrics, but also on how they treated people during ordinary interactions. The lessons from that afternoon had traveled far beyond a single property. Monica Reed returned to the hotel shortly before sunset for a follow-up review. This time there was no confusion at the entrance. Employees greeted her warmly. The young receptionist who had tried to verify the visitor list welcomed her with a genuine smile. Monica noticed a new confidence in the staff. More importantly, she noticed something else. People were paying attention to process rather than assumptions. As she walked through the lobby, she paused near the same framed photograph that had caught her attention weeks earlier. The evening light painted soft golden reflections across the glass. For a moment, she simply stood there, remembering how quickly a person's worth can be questioned when others decide who they are before learning the truth. Footsteps approached from behind. Monica turned and saw Richard Collins. He looked different, not because of his suit or his position, because of his demeanor. The certainty that once made him dismissive had been replaced by something more valuable. Humility. "Good evening," he said. Monica smiled. "Good evening." Richard glanced around the lobby. "Things have changed." "They have," Monica agreed. He nodded slowly. "I used to think experience meant trusting my instincts." Monica listened. Richard continued. "Now I think experience means knowing when your instincts might be wrong." The honesty in his voice was unmistakable. Monica appreciated it. Growth rarely arrives through comfort. It usually arrives through difficult moments people would rather forget. Yet the people who learn from those moments often become better because of them. Thomas Bennett joined them a few minutes later. Together they walked through the property discussing improvements, employee feedback, and future plans. The conversations were productive, professional, hopeful. As the review concluded, Thomas stopped near the entrance and looked back across the lobby. Guests moved freely through the space. Employees assisted them with quiet professionalism. Everything felt natural. "This is what leadership should create," he said softly. Monica followed his gaze. Respect, accountability, opportunity. None of those things required a title. They required choices. Outside, the sun disappeared below the horizon, leaving the sky painted in shades of amber and deep blue. Monica picked up her travel bag and headed toward the exit. She paused briefly before stepping through the doors. Not because she was looking back at a mistake, because she was looking at what had grown from it. Then she walked into the evening air and continued toward the waiting car. Behind her, the hotel lights glowed warmly against the darkening sky. Ahead of her, new projects and new challenges waited. And somewhere between those two worlds remained a lesson that would outlast every meeting, every title, and every building. The people who deserve respect are not determined by appearances. They deserve it because they are human. The rest is simply a story we tell ourselves until the truth arrives.